have removed a number of individuals. We saw them on those buses leaving this area. But as far as an escalation or any clashes between NYPD officers and protesters here, we have not seen that, Lindsay.
Okay, and we are hearing at this point that Hamilton Hall has been cleared at this point. I want to bring back in ABC News contributor, former FBI agent Brad Garrett. Hey, Brad, are you surprised that this is happening so quickly?
Yes, and pleasantly surprised. It would certainly seem like there weren't that many people in Hamilton Hall, that they were able to go room to room, floor to floor, and put flex cuffs on people and move them. And so far, this has really worked like clockwork. And as you all know, that doesn't always happen. And hopefully the same thing is occurring over at the encampment. But it's really good news that apparently NYPD has not been forced to be more aggressive with people.
And that is just based on their behavior, right? They're trying to keep things basically de-escalated.
Absolutely. Of course. I mean, we've learned the hard way historically in law enforcement that it's hard to unratchet once you've gone up. But if you meet the resistance based on what you're receiving, then that seems to work the best. So, what's the point? If you're going in and people are, maybe they're yelling or whatever, but they're doing what you tell them to do, then you just keep moving. You don't want to be part of the problem, and sometimes that does happen. And my sense is tonight is there just really hasn't been any significant problems.
And so at this point, kind of take us through the next few hours. These people who were involved, who were arrested, get processed, and then take us through what they were going to go through.
So because it's such a large number, they're gonna process them, they're gonna ID them. I don't know if they'll fingerprint them, they might, it just depends. But they're gonna at least know who they have picked up. And then intelligence will follow behind that to see what the backgrounds are of some of these people. If it ends up being true that there are outside agitators, people have nothing to do with the university, they'll figure out where that goes. And that obviously combined with the idea that NYPD is at least going to be in the proximity for the next 2 to 3 weeks, so things don't get out of hand again, I think is the key. And hopefully that will be the case.
And in the case of the Columbia University students, if we could maybe go out on a limb and assume that they don't have a record, do they spend the night in jail tonight? Is that a safe assumption?
I think it all depends. I mean, Bob Boyce mentioned earlier, they could just give them a ticket, basically, to come back at a certain time. We'll have to see. Will it be different as to the people in the building versus the people at the encampment? Maybe. I don't know. It depends on the circumstances, of course. But the other thing you're going to have to do, Lindsay, is when you have this number of people, there may be people that are wanted for something. And as you do checks, you may find out that there are people that you really have to take into custody. But, will people spend the night in jail tonight? I don't know. It's going to take a long time to process these folks. So it's going to at least be maybe tomorrow morning before many of them would be potentially released.
All right, Brad, thank you. I want to bring back in Detective Boyce to bring that question basically to you. Do you expect that there would be a different outcome, at least in the short term, if not the long term as well, for those who were occupying the inside the building versus the potentially students who were in the encampments on the grounds outside?
Sure, Lizzie. The fact that it was a structure changes things. That could easily ratchet up to a misdemeanor, possibly even a felony. In that situation, they'll be photographed and printed. And again, as Brad said, the interview process and finding who they are. Do they belong in that university or not? Are they a student or not? Are they someone else? That's important intelligence to come forward. As to the encampment, that might be a summons violation. We do not require that. It's up to the district attorney to go forward and see who they are at that point. If you don't belong there and you're there, you can be charged with criminal trespass of B misdemeanor and be fingerprinted and griff. For the most part, I think those inside the building, they'll be facing a larger criminal crime than someone in an encampment in a tent. But that's to be determined as going forward. I don't know how many they arrest. Those are two pretty big buses I saw. They'll be taken to a mass processing location within the city, and it'll go forward from there.
And before I let you go, I am curious, and this is Monday morning quarterbacking it a little bit, but as we've been talking about how Columbia really, they kept getting deadlines for several days. They would push back those deadlines for people to leave the encampments. Looking at this now, would you have said that the NYPD should have been brought in sooner?
I don't know about that. That's up to Columbia. It's a private institution. I think the thing that broke the back here was taking over Hamilton Pool. It was a whole different kettle of fish. And that's what probably propelled this forward, even more so. As soon as they took over the building, I knew this was going to be a short-term event. And it happened as I thought it would. The good news is it happened professionally. Nobody got hurt from what I understand right now. And it took a very short amount of time to do so. So these are all good things that happened tonight. Everybody acted professionally. And we'll see how we go from here.
All right, Detective Boyce, we thank you so much for your insight. And joining us now is Dr. Marianne Hirsch, Professor of English and Comparative Literature at Columbia University. And Professor, I know you've been working closely with students involved in the demonstrations. Are any of those students still on campus? What are they telling you right now?
I'm not in touch with students directly. I'm in touch more with faculty, a faculty group who's been supporting students. And I'm not in touch with the students who've been in the demonstrations and in the protests.
Okay, what have you heard from the faculty group that has been in touch with the students?
Well, I mean, we all think this is a terribly tragic situation. We do not want police to be entering our campus. We think this is putting the entire campus community and the neighborhood in Columbia where I live at tremendous risk to bring police and riot gear. I think there are many different ways that this could have been resolved with further negotiation. It did not have to be done at this speed. And let us not forget the escalation that the university itself is responsible for after months of escalating the situation, especially bringing police in on April 18th with little lead time after the first encampment was built.
And so you said that there are other ways that this could have been handled. How would you have liked to have seen it handled?
Well, there's professional mediation, there's further negotiations. We've seen building occupation and student protests over the history of education since perhaps 1968 and maybe before that. And there are ways to resolve this with mediations and some patience.
It does sound like it came to really a standstill when one of the main demands from the students who were protesting was that Columbia University divest, right, from any businesses at all related to the Israeli government. And the Columbia University clearly said, that's not an option. We're not going to divest. So at that point, how do you mediate further?
Well, there were a number of different demands. I think that the divestment had to do with the arms industry and with arms that are being provided to the state of Israel to carry on this war. I think students are watching a brutal war across the world. We have a very diverse student body of Jewish students and of also Palestinian students. And these students are watching the brutality going on across the world in which our government and our university is participating. So I think they feel like they're polluting, they're implicated in a situation that they find untenable, and they don't find that business as usual can go along. I'm not saying that I approve of taking over buildings. This is an act of civil disobedience that really didn't need to happen, and it didn't have to be this way. There could have been much more thoughtful negotiations in which the people from the administration could have gone down to the encampment to see. I was there. I had a Seder at the encampment with the students. It was peaceful. Students are very earnest. They have very strong convictions. And I think they're being treated like terrorists rather than as our students whom we care for. We have students in that entire corps part of the campus who are being put at risk with armed police right in riot gear coming into campus.
Do you see these demonstrations as different from other campus protests that you've seen in the past?
Well, I think they've each been different, but I'm old enough to have been in the demonstrations in the late 1960s when I was a student. I was a faculty member during the divestment movement from South Africa. All of these have involved actions by students that sometimes broke university regulations. But I think the impatience and the speed with which this had to be resolved, I have not experienced before, and the brutality of it.
There's speculation that many of the demonstrators are not affiliated with the school. I know you were saying that you went to the encampment and had Seder dinner with many of the students. Are you, from at least the encampment perspective, did you believe that you were predominantly among students?
The encampment was predominant, but probably, as far as I know, all students. That I understand is not at all the case in Hamilton Hall, and I don't know how those people get in. I think there were a number of demonstrations outside the gates of the campus that were obviously not students and not people in our community, and this has become what's happened, and I have to, the responsibility goes to our administration, that this has become a focal point of protest of many different kinds. We've had many people come to this neighborhood to protest who have nothing to do with our university.
And Miriam, before I let you go, I'm curious what you think of the president of Columbia University and how she's handled this.
Well, I'm not happy with how she's handled it. I would hope that she would acknowledge the mistakes that she's made, certainly in the congressional hearings in which she herself violated Columbia University procedures that are very long-standing in a number of different ways. So if students are being punished for violating process and violating university rules, I'm afraid that she violated some university rules herself. We would expect at least an acknowledgement of that, and I think that, as I said, it didn't have to be this way. This did not have to be handled this way. For example, she never came down to the encampment to talk to the students or to the faculty who were there to witness some of the deadlines that have been set.
Marianne Hirsch, Professor of English and Comparative Literature at Columbia, we thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And now I want to welcome to the show Cameron Jones, a sophomore there at Columbia University. And thank you so much for joining us. Give us a sense of where you are right now, what you're seeing.
Of course. So yeah, I am currently in the building that is next door to Hamilton Hall, where the individuals were occupying the hall. And dozens of students, press, and medics were waiting outside Hamilton, now renamed Penn Hall, awaiting the police officers.